Okay, so I'm so excited to be joined by Priyanka Villanassery. She is a physical therapist who does emotional regulation through movement, which I find is so interesting. So thank you so much for joining us.
Oh my gosh, thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to jump right into it because we have a lot to talk about. The first thing I want to ask you is, can you just like tell me your story? Like, how did you get to this niche? Like, it's such an interesting niche.
Yeah.
What brought you there, and what are some of the steps you took to get to this point?
Yes. So when I went to college, I remember I kind of went the route of like everybody else. Like everyone wanted to be a doctor. And the
Mhm,
more I looked into it, I was like, I really love like the one-on-one aspect
mhm.
of doing anything. And so I was like, what other like professions let me do that? So I ended up coming to physical therapy. I always knew I wanted to work with kids.
Mhm,
And there's again so many routes to do that. So I ended up picking physical therapy because I also loved dance growing up and movement growing up. And so I went through the schooling process and I've worked now in like now that I think about it, I've worked in like so many different settings. So
yeah,
I've worked in home health, outpatient, um, just in the clinic too, and then in the hospital system as well.
yeah.
Um, and I recently finished a pediatric physical therapy residency.
Mhm.
And throughout the whole thing, I was like, there is something missing in terms of like the mental health aspect of like really feeling safe in your body, feeling nurtured in your body. And like, frankly, in PT school, like we did not learn that. Like, there was not a lot of time and dedication towards how do you improve your mental health? How do you use all this movement and all this evidence we have that
Yeah.
shows like you can decrease depression and anxiety through movement? How do we use that to help this population? And I mean, I think in general, our society as a whole, like we're improving for sure. Like people talk about mental health issues more, but like
Mhm.
it's still not like easy to talk about. It's not like, oh, let's just like talk
Right.
about why we're so depressed today.
Right.
And I want that to be like one normalized, but two to not be like not feel so wrong, if
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Mhm.
And so and then the more I got into like working with the little babies, so like for example, in the neonatal intensive care unit, there's like very specific ways that you hold your baby. So
Mhm.
like you really want to be giving them a lot of deep compression, a lot of like almost like nesting where
Mhm.
you're giving them like full support around their body so they know that they're supported. So it's like simulating the womb, right?
Yeah.
And so if parents like don't realize that, or if you get I've seen a lot of kiddos who just like completely had like neglect
Mhm.
issues. So if they're not getting that like deep compression through, and I know that's not like per se the typical general movement, but if you're not
Yeah.
getting that kind of feeling and movement in your body, like the child and the baby like really gets emotionally dysregulated.
Yeah.
So they whatever they do, they start to cry, they'll like they don't understand where they are in body obviously at that time. So you're providing that environment. And I've listened to like a lot of different podcasts and like at this point a lot of different setting where like kids will like feel that, like how do I describe this? Like kids will feel that dysregulation as they get older too. Like they'll think like in their body they will feel like I was not protected. How do I protect myself? And that's like from such a little age. That's from like
Yeah.
zero, you know?
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah.
and so like the more I learned how to like handle the handling techniques for working with such little babies, and then even as they get older too, like giving them safe spaces to move around and play and not feel scared to play, that was just a huge thing to me. And so I'm still figuring this out, how to combine the two, where I'm really like working on the emotional regulation as I add in the movement piece. And then I mean personally for my own life too, I feel like all of the emotional dysregulation I had growing up kind of like went into my adulthood. And so now I'm unlearning so many things.
Yeah.
And I'm like, man, if I just had like certain like parenting techniques given to me, I feel like I would be at a certain emotional regulation state right now.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I think it's also beautiful because I'm learning that now and learning systems to teach myself that. But that's kind of what led me here. Like, how do I combine physical therapy with improving the mental health status of people?
Yeah, I love
Yeah.
that. There's so many things there. I mean, the one thing that really stands out to me, and I find this so interesting, is that our vagal tone is actually like inherited from our mothers. So however your mother's nervous system was regulated while you were in the womb, like you will
Utero.
carry that
Yes.
as well. And I think
Yes.
that's so fascinating because like you literally start out in the world with a certain amount of regulation. And like you said,
Exactly.
if your parents don't have the tools to help you emotionally regulate, you're going to be figuring that out
Yeah.
throughout life. And so like what
Yeah. And
you
it's
do, like,
not even something you can control, right? Like, you
yeah,
can't control the
you
vagal tone
can.
of your mother.
100%, exactly. And it is like it's something that you will carry on the rest of your life if
Yeah.
you'll have to figure out later in life, which is a lot harder having that dysregulation in your system. So I think what you do is
Yeah.
just that's an amazing niche because I mean there's
Thanks.
so much needed for that. And just the educational part of like having parents understand like if your baby's crying like this, there's other things you can do. And I as a
Yeah.
parent, that gives me so much hope when you have something like if your baby needs something, you're like, oh, well, have you done this? No, let me do that, you know? So it
Yes.
gives that
Yeah.
sense of like, okay, here's a tool you can actually use that's not an
Totally.
injection, it's not medication, it's something that you can use.
Yes.
It's a bonding experience. I love that.
Yes. And I also think like parents, like, I think like whenever I do have a baby, like it really helps that I've had this pediatric physical therapy behind me. I know how to handle
Yeah.
like handling techniques for babies, like how to help them not cry. Even like I had a friend who like basically she had two premature babies. And so she was like, Priya, like they keep crying hysterically when we do diaper changes. And so
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, like let me just come and see. And like this was the moment it clicked in my head of like, oh, people just like don't know this stuff, like, and
Yeah.
all we did was like the entire time I had my hand on her belly, just giving not too much compression, but just a little
Yeah.
bit and always touching. So the baby
Mhm.
knew that like something is around her. And it was such a simple thing, but at the same
Yeah.
time, like, why would you know that if you haven't been around babies your whole life? And if
Yeah.
you've been in like the corporate life, like, why would you know these things,
Exactly. Yeah.
So
Well, it's
to be able to give simple tools like that, or
yeah.
like even the other one that I always use is put the baby inside lying and literally like pat their butt and then
Yeah.
have their hand over their tummy and just pat their butt. They get so calmed
Yeah.
from that.
Oh, yeah.
So like again, little things you don't realize. And she was like, how did you do that? And I was like, I just showed her those two things and it
Yeah.
really did help. So
Yeah.
yeah,
It's so
yeah.
funny. You can buy like a children's toy and it comes with a user manual this thick. You bring home a human baby and you get nothing. Like,
No
good
idea.
luck with it, So it's
Yeah.
like the parents out there, like, don't fault yourself. Like, it's a
Like,
learning
is there
process.
anything? I don't have my own child yet, but like
Yeah.
for someone who is a mom, like,
Yeah.
was there anything like that was like explained to you or given to you?
No.
Not really. Okay.
No, I mean, I have two children. I have a 3-year-old and a 3-month-old, and it's
Yes.
like it was a learning process with each of them. They're both very
Oh,
different. So things that worked with my first son don't necessarily work with my second son. And it's like every
totally.
child is different. But then like if you have different techniques you can do like that, like that's useful,
Yeah.
like my second son's very chill. My first one, he did a lot more like calming down. We would walk with him for like hours on end, be like, please.
Really?
So like having these calming techniques, like as a parent, when you're like at your wit's end, and you just want to sleep,
Yes.
like,
And
I
they
mean,
don't stop crying.
yes, it's invaluable. I mean, it's,
Don't.
like, it's just the most valuable thing. Like it would be amazing, to have those techniques. So emotional regulation at every age, like
Yeah.
is so important. And I think that's just so amazing what you do because there's such a need for that in so many places. And like
Yeah. Oh,
especially
thank
with
you.
myself as a parent, I know a lot of parents, most of my friends are parents. It's like, every stage requires a different set of emotional regulation.
Yeah. And how you go about it, it's so complex.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
complex.
Absolutely. But such a need for it. So I love that.
Yay.
So kind of going off of that, what would you say are like some of the similarities or differences between like how children emotionally regulate and how adults emotionally regulate?
Yeah, oh, that's such a good question. So and like you said, for children, I feel like it's different at every age. And then it's also different based on the child, right? Like some children are like super aversion to touch. And then others are like, if you give them so much compression, they just feel so calmed by it. So it's kind of like you said, like with your two kids,
Yeah.
you have to come at it at individual ways based on the kid. But if you have those tools and understand like compression is meant to calm down our nervous system, or like say you have a kid that just has a lot of energy, like running it out, like truly like getting out that energy also can calm them down too. And I've worked a lot with kids with autism too. So I've noticed one way to also, like, it's almost like planning, but it really emotionally regulated my kiddos, was something called the PEC system. So picture exchange communication system. And it's basically like, it's like a little checklist for kids. So like you put a picture of like the activity you're doing, and the way I used it, it was always Velcro. So like once we were done with the activity, the kiddo can just like take it off, and then they feel, they know it's done. They know first we need to do this activity. Now it's done after we take it off. And so I do like just 4 different tasks. So this would be for like your older kiddos. 4 different tasks, and then giving them the autonomy of like, you're getting this task done, you're pulling it off, you're able to emotionally regulate yourself to do whatever task you're doing. I feel like that actually helped quite a bit. And then teenagers are hard. It's like they're in the phase of like, I'm too cool for you. So I always noticed for teenagers, like, I think the best way that I handled it was like, you got to get on their level of whatever they like. So if it's like video games or that, like, but again, if I'm being frank with you, this is something I'm figuring out system-wise, how I want to teach this too. Cause I feel like for the younger kiddos, it's almost easier to do than it is for teenagers. And then when you get to young adulthood, if you really aren't someone who like knows your emotions or is like okay to feel vulnerable with them, then you just kind of like push them over here, you know? So, and frankly, like that's kind of how I grew up for some time. So like now becoming an adult, it's become more of like awareness of the emotion and then acceptance of that emotion. And then like my process is accepting the emotion, feel that emotion, like feel safe in feeling it, even if it's very uncomfortable, very like gross, and then you self-soothe. So I personally, like I'll put a hand to my heart literally, and I'll say like, it's okay for me to feel guilty right now. Like I still love myself feeling this huge amount of guilt right now. And then I self-soothe in that way. And frankly, and I don't know if this is a thing, but I wasn't given that kind of speech or communication tactic when I was younger. And so it feels really uncomfortable because that's not what I was raised with. But it really helps. Like, it helps to teach you can self-soothe as an older or a young adult, adult. And then finally I do something like silly, like laugh. So that way in my brain, I'm reprocessing this feeling, if that makes sense. So like I'll watch a funny video or I'll like just laugh to myself, but it's just to interrupt the pattern of like, I was feeling so guilty. Like, let's see how we can reorient that feeling. So that's what I do as a young adult. But if you can learn those techniques, the first techniques when you're younger, it feels so much easier to do as an adult.
Oh, I'm sure. So much easier. Well, your brain is so much more adaptable when you're a child, and then it's like as an adult, it was like decrease the pathways that you've learned, and then rewire them, which is much harder. And it's like you just
are becoming a whole new person every day, if I'm being frank.
Absolutely. And the thing is, like, I think the shame of it is that, like, everything you described, I am totally on board with. But I think what happens is that people sometimes think that, oh, this is just like, foo-foo stuff, but there is a legit science to it. And I think that's what people need to know. Like, everything you described, there is a legit science to that. There is, is actually rewiring.
Like, your body straight up doesn't feel safe right now. And you can't, I mean, there are a lot of people that do function from a place of fear and they go forward, but there will be a moment where like, it's shaky or like something doesn't feel right. Maybe it's not now, but it could be later. And like, you won't have that ability to regulate. I feel like if you could learn these tools now, it would just feel so normal. Like you wouldn't even have to question it that much. And it's not even that hard. Like, the moment you let go into the feeling, I think I'll have to like send you whatever I read, but it was like an emotion. If you fully feel it, it's like a 90-second thing. Like if you really feel it. And I think people think like your emotions, like if you really go to that dark place, it's going to feel forever. And it's going to like take this huge hold of you. And it might for a little, like that time when you feel it, but like, you're also feeling it so you can move through it, and get to a different thing. And I think like as a society, we're just like not there to just like let
100%.
ourselves feel that.
Yeah, no, you're 100% correct. And I think that's a big thing is that people don't realize that like they expect this big overarching, like really difficult tool, but a lot of the tools are actually pretty simple. But
So yeah,
yeah, and it's all about the brain wiring and how the brain chemistry works and how the neurotransmitters work. I mean, it's all real and
it's just how
evidence-based.
our body works.
That's it. It's all
Like
evidence
literally
based.
just
Yeah,
touching, like connecting, like getting out of the head, connecting
yeah,
to your body, like such a simple thing, but like
exactly.
I don't know why we don't use that more.
Yeah, yeah. And it's a shame that it's not taught throughout life. And I think that it's such an
Yeah.
important tool to do. And I was actually watching a podcast the other day and it was talking about how as children, our parents soothe us. So like if you're crying, they
Yes.
usually comfort you and everything like that.
Yes.
And then as an adult, you don't have somebody to soothe, but you never learn self-soothing because
Right.
you were always soothed externally. So then as an adult,
Right.
people turn to drugs, alcohol, porn, or whatever it may be, things
Yes.
that
Yeah.
they think is going to soothe them and make them feel better. And
Yeah.
that's the problem that like that becomes
Yeah.
soothing techniques, but it's really just not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's hard because like I think I'm getting to a place like I don't want to blame my parents for things they didn't know, right? Like this is as a society, I think we're learning so much.
Yeah.
But I think the next thing, like if your parents self or soothed you,
Yeah.
I think the next step, as you were saying that, in my head, it came like, what if you also taught them like, look, you can do it too, you know? And like you literally have your like 2-year-old child put their hand on their heart and like you do it with them so they know it's like parallel, but they're understanding that this is something they can do later. Exactly. And then like in my mind, I'm like thinking of like your like 3-year-old child. I'm like, when for men, it's like a whole other issue too, right? So like when this 3-year-old child, if you could teach him that now, like when he's like 28, 29, he'll just naturally bring his hand to his chest. Like you don't even have to think about it.
Exactly.
Like, you know how much you have to think about doing that process?
Right.
So
it becomes
much.
Automatic. Yeah. And it's so funny. The other night he was like crying hysterically. I'm like, okay, let's do some breath work. So I'm like, breathe like a lion. So we do a big inhale and we do like a roar as a lion, you know, let's do a tiger breath. Like, let's do a rabbit breath. But like adding those things, like it could be fun, you know, and it's all those things that like, you know, I've learned as an adult, I didn't have these tools as a child, you know, but they do work. And I think if you can implement that at a younger age, like what a gift to all these people as they become adults where they don't have to like figure out that things aren't going well. And then it becomes a catalyst to do it.
Right. Like they can just prevent it. Like I love that you do that with your kids because that's like preventative. Like he's going to be able to like, and maybe he won't, well, I don't know, maybe when he's older, he will breathe like a lion or roar like a lion. But he will know breathing will take me to a calm place so I can navigate whatever's happening.
Yes, exactly. Just having that association because like, if you asked me when I was like, 3, what breath work is, I'm like, I don't know.
No,
I don't know what that is. You asked me at 13, I didn't know what it was, like, so yeah, I think it's just, I love that you're like bringing light to that because there needs to be more awareness around that like emotional regulation for kids is not just medication. It's not just, all these quick fix things. Like there's things that are lifestyle behavioral things that work tremendously well and are long lasting.
Totally. And like, if it's truly that bad, go to the medication, but why not try these things, instill this in them and see how it shifts their life a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Without the secondary complications and consequences of some of those other more invasive procedures.
Yeah. From a young age.
Yeah, exactly. I love that.
Totally.
So kind of going off of that, what are some of your like daily habits, routine? Like, what does that look like for you? I know you said that kind of went from a place of like emotionally dysregulated and now you're in a much better place. Like, what do you do on a daily basis to keep yourself?
Yes. And I will say, like, I feel like it's always like a constant learning of what works really well. And it's so individual again, right? So like for me, I like adore meditation. I feel like meditation truly has changed my life in so many ways because it gets you one to focus and focus your attention, but then 2, it gets you to listen to your like true intuition. So like, when you're in regular society, like you hear all these people's like voices and their thoughts of what they think should be right, what they genuinely believe or what they don't believe. And they're just spewing whatever they think society's supposed to do. But when you spend like, even like 5 minutes just meditating, like you hear yourself a little bit. And then the more you practice it too, you hear yourself more. So like for me, I start the morning with that. Like I start with meditating, and I had to build it up quite a bit. Like when I first started, I was genuinely, I was too anxious. So like I would meditate and use the breathing with the meditation, but it was hard for me to focus. And then the more I practice it though, I'm at like 20 minutes now.
Wow.
And like it's every time it changes my life, like every time. So I do 20 minutes of that in the morning, and then I journal. So like after that, because I've had the time with my own self. So then I start to journal. I either journal my feelings or like kind of what I want for my life, like the visualization of what I get from the meditation. And then I'd say those are two of my biggest things for my mind. But then my body, I've done strength training now for quite some time. And I kind of combine, like I'll do 2 days of strength training, 2 days of cardio, and then kind of incorporate stretching throughout the week or yoga throughout the week. And like before, when I was younger, if I were to work out, like if I'm being frank, I used it for like totally aesthetics. Like I didn't like use it for anything else but that. And it was never motivating enough. Like I never like like I would go to the gym and do really good workouts for like 3 days. And then I'd be over it. Like I'd be like, this is too hard. I'm tired. I don't want to do it. Then the moment I switched it to like, this makes me happier. Like if I push really hard in the gym, and luckily I'm a physical therapist, so I can safely do that. But like, if I find my safe way to do that, like I get all this huge endorphin rush. And so now I notice if I don't go to the gym, like pretty much it's like every 2 days, by like the end of the second day, I'm like jittery. And so then I know like I need to emotionally regulate through the strength training. Personally, for me, strength training has been like my like game changer. But I also think like I say, everyone's individual. So like I'm very blessed that I have all the exercise knowledge that I have. So like, I would just work with you on, okay, maybe strength training's not your thing. Is running your thing? Is yoga your thing? Like, but framing it in like, this makes me happy. Like this, like literally brings me happiness. That has changed everything for me. And I feel like now, honestly, for the rest of my life too, I'll just use it for emotionally regulating myself. So I'd say that. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. I learned of this new thing, Kelly. It's called EFT tapping.
Oh, I love
I tried
that.
to look. Have you heard it? Have you used it before?
Yeah, I do use it. Yeah.
Do you feel like it's helpful?
Yes, I do. I find it helpful. I
was every single time I do it, like I've never had a time where it doesn't work.
And it's amazing.
So I'm like, it's pretty crazy. And it's so easy too. Like you literally just tap and talk to yourself differently. And like it's harmless. And like when I tried to look at the research behind it too, just to see like what is out there. There's not a lot out there. Some of it is for PTSD. Some of it is like, it's woo-woo stuff. But I'm also like if it had some kind of horrible negative effect, then I would be like, nah, don't use it. But it's literally, you just tap, like it's all you do. And in my head, I try to justify like, okay, how could that scientifically work? Like in my head, at least for me, I'm a chronic overthinker and I'm really working on it. It brings me back to my body. Like it brings me like, here's my hand, here's my head. Like, and then I'm saying all these nice things to myself that I'm connecting my body to my brain. And I think that's like the true like magic of that. So I recently just started that, but I think I'm like going to incorporate that into the morning routine for sure.
It's it's amazing. I started doing that probably about a year ago. If you haven't read the book Bliss Brain, I would highly recommend it. It's by Dawson
I'll look into
Church,
it.
But he does a lot of EFT tapping or EFT. And I think it was him. It might have been someone else, but he works with veterans. And I think it was him. Veterans and PTSD and
that makes sense.
And I think a lot of like the research has been like through him because he's been a really like he's spearheaded a lot. But that's kind of where I got exposed to it. And I'm like, you know what, let me just try this, because same thing, like meditation for me, like I struggled with meditation because when I started, because I was like, I didn't, when I first started, I didn't realize that it is coming back to the focus is just as useful. But at the time, I'm like,
Yes.
well, I'm not good at this. I can't keep my mind off of everything I need to do. So I was discouraged.
I'm just bad at meditation.
Yeah. And so like the EFT was a really good like way to kind of transition into like, okay, I'm bringing myself back, and
Yeah.
and like it was enough where you have to focus on all these things. You can't think about what you need to do tomorrow or like have a negative
Yeah.
thought. Like, so I found it
Yeah. Oh, I
very
love
useful.
that. I love that you use
Yeah.
that as a transition to eventually meditate. That's
Yes.
like, that's amazing.
Yeah. And it works
Yeah.
tremendously well. So like I combine that breath work and meditation and it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's just
Yeah.
amazing. But
I
yeah,
know. And I'm like, this is so easy to do. Like, I just,
yeah.
and not like, because sometimes I'm like, okay, maybe this time it won't work. But every single time it's like, at least in
Yeah.
some level, lessened the anxious feelings for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And especially when you become more aware of yourself, you can realize that like, okay, where am I? Because sometimes when
yes.
we're so wrapped up, you don't even know you're anxious because it's kind of like your status quo, like that's your
Yeah,
baseline. So once you
totally.
start doing these things regularly, you're like, wow, okay, that's what it can feel like. Let's do this,
Yeah.
and you want to do it. And that's the beauty of it. And like something that you said like really resonated me, like when you're talking about strength training, and then like when you started doing it for aesthetic reasons initially, but then you did it more because of how it made you feel. And it's like when you have a strong enough why behind what you're doing,
Mhm.
that's what keeps you going. So it's like
Yeah.
that's the amazing thing. It's like you don't have to be like, I have to do this. It's like this is meaningful enough. I'm worth it. Let me do this.
Yes. Like,
And
I want to be happy. This is like easy. Like, I
yeah,
mean, strength training is not easy when you're doing it, but like,
right.
it's a pretty straightforward way to bring me some
Yeah.
happiness. Like, why not? Like,
Absolutely. And if it
yeah.
makes you feel good, like why would you want to not do
Yeah.
that for yourself,
Yeah. Yeah.
Kind of
Totally.
like I love that you're the routine that you have because I think that's so important for so many people to have that regimen where you're showing up for yourself first in the morning. You
Right.
do it for yourself. You don't grab your phone. You don't, show up for the world when you're not even showing up for yourself. So I love
Yes.
that you do
And I
that.
feel like I know a lot of people too, like, it's hard when you have so many obligations, right? Like for you, like you're a parent, but
Mhm.
I really also believe that like, if you do that for yourself, you're like in my head, I think of kids a lot. Like I'm
Yeah.
they I do. I love working with kids because they're so like playful and curious and they just like they're sponges. So like in
Yeah.
my head, it's like if you do this, watch how your kids change. Like the action that
Yes.
you're showing makes your kids so much better. But if you're like in a frenzied state and you're always saying like I have to work, I have this, I have that, like that's like you can tell your kids, yeah, meditate,
Yeah.
this will help you. But if you're not showing them through action, like it's not gonna do anything for your kid.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And
You're
so that's why
right
I'm like,
on.
yeah, like I get you have obligations. I'm not saying you don't, like, but I'm
Yeah.
also like think of the big picture of like this will literally change your kid's life for the better.
Mhm.
And I
Yeah.
know all parents, they want the best for their kids, and maybe we got to get you from like step A to B to understand like,
Yeah.
yes, you're going to have to take this time for yourself, but in the end, you're really taking that time for your kid,
Yeah. Oh,
So,
absolutely. And kind of like a story going off of that like completely supports what you just said is that the other day I know I felt dysregulated. Like there was like a few things that happened that I was like, it just put me in a frenzy. I knew
yeah,
what to do and I didn't do it. I knew I needed to step away, do some breath work, take some time for myself. I didn't do it. And my son, and I feel horrible. He kept like, mom, like, like kept doing stuff. He spilled stuff. And I was like, Wyatt, stop. Like I yelled, I lost it. I
yeah,
was like, why are you doing this? And then I
yeah,
was like, it's not him. He didn't do anything wrong. It was me, and because I didn't take the time to make sure I was regulated that day and make sure I was in a good place, like I yelled at him. And like
yeah,
that's something that like I take responsibility for. Like that was my responsibility to make sure I was in a good enough place to not,
right.
yell at him.
But then it's like, right. But then it's
Yeah.
like, that's okay to do, right? We're human, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But
Yeah.
right. But then it's like, what do you do from there, right? To
Exactly.
first regulate yourself and then come to your
Yeah.
child and be like, mommy was upset,
Yeah.
and like, but
Yep.
she's taken this time to regulate you. Like, I mean, you would say that in a child-friendly way, but like,
Yeah.
and then they would see like, yes, like humans get mad, but they also have the capability to like help themselves through it,
Yeah.
you know?
Yep. And it's also like you don't have to be perfect. It doesn't mean you'll never have those moments. Like clearly I
Right.
had that moment, but I will say like 95% of the time I'm not like that. Like I
Yeah.
can like buffer stress. I can be stress resilient because I do those tools as well. But like, and that's
Yeah.
the thing, like for anyone who's experienced that, like there are gonna be times that like you're not perfect. I wasn't perfect that day. It was like a day
Yeah.
where I'm like, I need to do better. But as long as you can
But
get
I
back
think
on
it's
the train,
beautiful
you're
that you
good.
even, but I think it's beautiful you even say that because that's just
Yeah.
the truth of the matter. Like,
Yeah.
like all these things I'm saying to you, like it's work. Like,
Mhm.
especially if like you weren't taught to think that way before or feel that way before. So like, it's almost like it's okay to get mad, and then it's okay to
Yeah.
give yourself grace after that too.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because like
Exactly.
I'm so glad you said that story too, because
Yeah.
I feel like that will resonate with a lot of parents because
Mhm.
I feel like a lot of people, they have like the mommy guilt. I'll hear about that all the time. And I'm
Oh
like,
my gosh,
this
yes.
is not easy. It's
Yeah.
okay if you like freak out a little bit.
Yeah.
I think it's just what we choose to do after the human emotion of freaking out, you
That's
know?
it. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's always you always have choices. Like, yeah, there's
Yeah.
moments you're not very proud of, but like 100% what you said, like you can choose to keep going down that path where you're like snapping every 5 seconds or figure out how to
Right.
help yourself be in a better place that you are more whole for your children, which is
Yeah.
so important to be.
Yeah,
Kind of
totally.
going off of that, what do you think are some of like the big obstacles people face? Because this is a tough thing for so many people to like
Hmm.
be in a place where they can buffer stress. Like, what do you think are some of the bigger obstacles as far as like emotional regulation?
Yeah. I can speak to like when you were not given tools as a young child,
Yeah.
that to me has been, I feel like, is a huge obstacle. And then the more I talk about it with people, the more I realize like, oh, most people have not been given these tools, you know,
Yeah.
like this is something everyone is trying to work on.
Yeah.
And so I think that's like a huge obstacle. And then like this idea of right and wrong.
Mhm.
So like it's wrong for me to be mad at my child. Like it's
Mhm.
not wrong. Fully accepting like this is just what it is. Like we are human. It
Yeah.
happens. Like I feel like that idea too, the right or wrong thing is
Mhm.
like a prevalent thing in society, but it's an obstacle for us to like just accept what the emotion
Mhm.
is, you
Yeah.
know?
Yep.
And then the third thing I think is like truly accepting the emotion, like acceptance of what is happening right now. Like I think everybody should have
Yeah.
goals of what they want in their life,
Mhm.
but also understand like it's okay to like accept things
Mhm.
while you reach the goals. And
Yeah.
so that includes emotions, right? So like accept like you feel angry about something, or accept you feel really sad about something,
Mhm.
and like not push it away because you think you're supposed to be happy all the time. Like I feel like humans were meant to have all these emotional experiences, but for
Yeah.
some reason in society, like people portray only the happy ones, and they don't realize what a beauty it is to also like feel the sadness, feel
Yeah.
it, and then be able to like have the power to like find a way to come back to yourself or find happiness
Mhm.
again. And then you move, and it's like a flowing thing, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that third thing of acceptance would is a huge obstacle too.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree. I really think that, like you said, as a society, like you're supposed to be this like positive person all the time, and it is not real. It's not the
Yeah.
reality of it.
But
And it's
it's
like you can only
okay.
be
Like,
negative behind closed doors. Like it's
right.
like, yeah, it's like when someone said, "Hey, how you doing?" Like it's like good, no matter how bad you're doing. You're oh, I'm fine.
Right.
Like,
Right.
you know, but it's like I feel
But
it's
then, like,
also
if you just cried it out, I feel like if you cried it out, like I'm a fan of that. Like, just cry it
yeah,
out. It's fine. You can get to the happier state a lot more quickly, and you can be
yeah,
chronically like happier. And then you have the moments of whatever shame, guilt, anger, sadness that you feel.
yeah.
But like, I feel like pushing it away
Mhm.
makes you chronically unhappy.
Yeah. Yep.
So like, if you truly want to be happy, you're gonna have to accept like these
Yeah.
other harsh emotions.
Exactly. Yeah, like the
Yeah.
level of like vulnerability, like how vulnerable can you
Mhm.
be? And it's so ironic because the more vulnerable you are, the happier you are because you're more your authentic
Yes.
self. And that's the
Yes.
beauty of it. But it's like, and I remember like, years ago when I was kind of going through the thick of like my eating disorder, like I was like my outward appearance to everybody was much different than what was going on inside, because I'm like,
Yes.
no, I'm an athlete, I'm strong, like I'm fine, like I'm just, like I had all these like
Yeah.
outward personas, but inside I was like so sad and alone, it's like, but I
Yeah.
didn't feel like, I felt like I was living two different lives. So like I had no
Yep.
vulnerability and I was not happy. I felt like I
Right.
was being almost like a fraud. Like people were seeing this one person who's like dedicated and exercising all the time and an athlete, but inside I was like, no, I'm just doing this because I'm very sad, and
Right.
I'm
Right.
feeling a void that's not there and I didn't know how to fill it any other way,
Right. And
you
like
know?
you just didn't want to like deal with that void feeling,
Yeah.
or whatever that feeling was. Like it was just easier to do the other thing
Yeah.
of exercising and being over athletic or whatever.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. It's just, yeah, kind of going back to a comfort zone, which, it's not
Hmm.
necessarily the healthiest thing, but it's comfortable. It's something that makes you feel
Exactly.
safe because of that.
Exactly. Because you won't have to deal with the hard emotion that could be
Exactly.
very uncomfortable.
Exactly. It always feels so much harder. Like, okay, well, I'll just do the easy task. Like, but yeah, it's not the right thing ever. When you felt like you were like emotionally dysregulated when you were younger, like what were some things that you used to like kind of cope with that until you learned
Yeah.
tools?
Yeah. So like to be frank with you, I feel like when I was younger, I did not emotionally cope well.
Yeah.
Like I feel like I would like almost yell. Like I would like get angry
Yeah.
and just like yell it out, like even to people, like to my
Yeah.
siblings, friends sometimes, like, and like I just did not have a good way to like communicate things,
Mhm.
So like,
Yeah.
and then like pretty much all throughout college, like I I also had the eating disorder. I like would binge eat and
Mhm.
I would like eat to like not deal with how hard things were.
Yeah.
And so and it was throughout college, throughout PT school, like
Mhm.
like it was just like kind of like you just said, like it was just so much easier to just eat 21 wings of beat ups rather
Yeah.
than face the fact like why do I remember thinking this, like why do I feel like I have to work so much harder to understand this concept
Mhm.
than someone else in my class? Like why
Yeah.
does it seem like it just comes so willy-nilly to them
Right.
but then not to me? But then I didn't want to accept like the idea like maybe I'm not smart enough. Like I didn't want to accept that. So then
Mhm.
the eating would just
Yeah.
make me not think of it, or like I just didn't have to go there, right?
Mhm.
And so I don't know. To be honest, I can't pinpoint when like what shift happened that made me change it. I think
Yeah.
one of the huge key factors for me was using the strength training as my mental health happiness
Mhm.
rather than food. And
Mhm.
like it was definitely a process. Like I had to
Yeah.
really be like, I love food, I
Yep.
do,
Yeah.
but like I like every time you just feel so bad afterwards, and it's just and like you feel so numb afterwards,
Yeah.
after you eat a lot.
Mhm.
And I was like, and again, this is something I'm still learning to like really self-soothe in my harsh
Yeah.
emotions of like I'm not worthy or whatever the emotion
Mhm.
is.
Yeah.
And so over time, I think what I did reflecting back is I switched the idea that strength training is going to make me happy. It brings me happiness every 2 days. Like
Mhm.
it's just like a hit of happiness. And then the meditating, like and then what the thing I started off with was like the strength training, but then the meditating came, the journaling came, and then naturally over time I started to look at food as like a nutrient source, if that makes sense. So like because before I literally was like going off of the taste of God, food is so tasty and it makes me forget everything and like it. But now I view it as like, how do I use this food to give me the strength I want at the gym? Or like if I'm going to do my cardio day, how is this food going to be burned so I can like really get a good workout here? And like those kind of mental shifts were huge for me. But I the thing is I understand like in the thick of your binge eating, like it is very hard to think that way, right? Like
Absolutely.
it's so hard. And so I don't know, we're gonna have to talk again about how what was the emotional switch in my brain to make me think, what if I tried to view strength training differently? And
Mhm.
that like how did that help me get out of binge eating? You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because
Yeah.
it is hard when you're in it
Yo,
to think
100%. Yeah,
rationally.
absolutely. Because and it's again, it comes down to like wiring and neurotransmitters. Like whenever anyone
Right.
binges, there literally is like a dopamine hit that you're getting that is like a
Yeah.
reward system. So if you're being rewarded by it in your brain, it's like, why would you stop? So then it's like you
Right.
keep going through that same cycle. And it's like when you're going through that, it is like, that's the end all be all. Like, that's the most important thing because it makes me feel good. But the problem is that you
Right.
get the dopamine and then you get the shame of it afterwards. So then
Yes. And I
the
think that
shame, the
shame
guilt,
too, you don't want to
yeah,
accept that shame after either. So then it
yes,
just keeps
it's
going
a
in the
cycle.
cycle.
It's a very
Yes,
vicious
it's horrible.
cycle. It is,
Yeah.
yeah. And especially if you're
Yeah.
like you're using exercise, like it's like you just kind of get into a cycle of like, this is the only thing that makes me happy, even though I'm not really happy, but it just
Right.
soothes me for a moment to get through the
Right.
next day. And
Right.
it's incredibly hard to
Right.
think and have a different perspective when you're going through that, for sure.
Right. And
And
as you're saying that too, I'm like, not like, now I'm realizing really the only way to do it is to accept the emotion behind why you're binge eating.
mhm,
Like, and I'm not saying it's an easy thing, but I
yeah,
think that is the only way to get out of it. Cause maybe I did that, and then I switched out the food with the strength training.
yeah,
And I really genuinely believe, like, I could feel the endorphins coming from the exercise
mhm,
because I pushed myself in the gym. I wasn't doing like easy workouts. I like
yeah,
really made my muscles work. And so, like, I don't know, I just got a lot of endorphin release from it. And so that switch happened. So maybe also that switch made it easier to accept the emotion. But at
mhm,
the end of the day, I think you have
yeah.
to come back to, I have to accept the shame, whatever it is.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, it's not necessarily about the behavior, but it's the what's the why behind the behavior. Like
Yeah.
why
Yeah.
are you, eating excessively? Like what's causing you to do that? And it is like there's
Yes.
some emotion, something that's undealt with that you need to
Right.
bring awareness to. And it really is like you could literally have the same behavior and have a perspective shift. And the perspective shift is what allows you to have freedom from that. Where it's like
Yes.
strength training, like before, if you're doing it for just aesthetic purposes, you could literally do the same strength training routine, but as long as your mindset is in a different place, then that's healing. So it's not about what you're necessarily doing, but like, why are you doing that?
Yes.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the beauty of it. It's like just figuring out how you can shift your perspective and bring awareness to why you're doing what you're doing. And
Yeah.
that's an amazing gift to figure out how to do that. But
Yeah.
another thing you said too is like when you talked about how you kind of like replaced the binging with like the strength training and how that allowed
Yeah.
you to get out of that. I think that's such a huge thing for so many people to understand. It's like you don't want to let yourself feel a void. So if you were to be like, I am not going to binge, I'm going to use willpower, I'm not going to binge, that is a
Yeah.
failing prophecy.
Willpower ain't
And
working
there's
today.
no amount of willpower is going to stop that.
Yeah.
So it's like
Because your brain and your body will tell you otherwise.
that's it.
Like,
You're going
yeah.
to go back, and that's why so many people go back to those habits. You gravitate back to those habits. You cannot rely on
Yeah.
willpower. You have to rely
Yeah.
on other tools and other things to help yourself get into a place where
Yeah.
you want to get out of that binging behavior. And
Yeah.
that's the shift too, because I think so many people get stuck in this. Like I know like people who binge, anyone who has like eating disorder, you're doing something that you don't
Yeah.
want to do, but you're doing it.
Yes.
It gives you something. So that's the frustrating thing. It's not like a cognition thing. You don't
Yeah.
know it's not good to do that. It's more
Yeah.
like,
It's just your body feeling
yeah,
into this feels really good. And this is the
yeah,
only way I know how to make myself happy right now.
yes.
So that's a really good point too. Maybe that just like a little bit of a shift
Mhm.
somewhere. Like it doesn't have to
Yeah,
be strength training. Like it could be like anything. You could switch
yeah,
it to yoga. You could whatever you felt comfortable. And that's why like I always preface this as like it's so individual,
it is.
like for
Yeah,
some reason strength training and me like match in heaven. But like
yeah,
for someone else
yeah,
that might not be it. But just
yeah,
the basic foundation of like you have the binge eating, let's see if we can shift something out for it. And
yes.
then be graceful with ourselves in
Mhm.
probably we'll go back to the binge
Yeah,
eating. Like it's
right.
okay.
It's
Like,
not
but
linear.
you're also
Yeah.
right. But you're also, shifting out one of these
Mhm.
behaviors to help yourself get out of it.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like
Yeah.
those little things give you a foothold. It's like it's that
Yes.
slope, and it just
I
gives you a
like
little
that.
foothold where now you can get to the next foothold and you work
Yes.
your way out of it. There's never a giant leap out of it. It's just figuring out how
Right.
to baby step my way out of this where
Exactly.
I'm in a place where I don't want to slide back down that hill. So
Exactly.
yeah,
Exactly. Love
absolutely.
that.
I know you had talked about the five. I'm sorry, I'm losing this. The big five. And I wonder
Yes.
if you could elaborate, like, what are the big five that you're
Yes.
talking about for emotional regulation and
Yes.
kind of just talk
So
about that.
I have to say too, I didn't come up with this. I just thought it was genius. And so I kind of morphed it into how I use it in my life. But there is a physician, his name is Dr. Gaber Mate. And he goes into a lot of like trauma work and healing work. And like, if you're really interested in this stuff, I would look into his work because it was very healing for me to learn. And basically he talks about these 5 things that parents can give their children to help emotionally regulate them. So they are security. So that means like the child feels secure. So like when I heard it, I immediately went to like that compression hold for like a little baby in the NICU or the neonatal ICU. So the child feels secure, stable. The second one's emotional expression. So they truly feel like every emotion that they have, you let that child express it fully. So like if they are obnoxiously yelling at you, like let them get that out, because kind of like the moment you stifle that, it's like, oh, I can't express that emotion. And then you learn from a young age, like I got to suppress my emotions. So that's the second one. The next one is play, which I'm a pediatric PT, so I'm like always going to propose play. Like even now, I even think when I'm like a 50-year-old adult, like I will always be playing, you know, because it's so good for the brain and it gets you out of like being so serious and like it lets you be the full human you should be, you know? The next one is also rest. And I think as a society, we just suck at rest. I mean, I personally suck at rest, but like I see it in everybody, like truly taking the time. Like when I think of rest, I think of like that meditation, that 5 minutes where you're literally just with your brain and you're feeling safe with your brain and your body. Like that to me is rest. So like rest is not you're sitting on the couch with your phone going down. And it's fine to do too at times, but like give yourself some time to truly rest. And then finally, the last one is peace. So the peace aspect, I kind of take it within myself, mostly because I'm a young adult now, but the idea that he explained was it's peace in the parent. So like the parent does not need this child to give them emotional happiness. The parent is able to emotionally regulate themselves so that the child can experience that peace. And then through that action, through that feeling, the child feels peace too. But the peace aspect comes into the parent. And that too, my immediate thought process, I've heard so many people say like my kids, they bring me so much joy, and they should bring you so much joy. But at the same time, there should be parts of yourself that bring you so much joy. And again, so that your kids see it, so they know how to do that for themselves. And so that's kind of the big 5. So security, emotional expression, rest, play, and peace.
I love that. And it just incorporates every aspect and
it does.
So important.
You can individualize. I think my favorite part is you get to individualize it. Because like I grew up doing Indian dancing, right? And I adored that growing up. But to be frank, like there's not, and maybe I should look harder, but there's not really any like adult Indian dancing groups that I can join here in Arizona. So it's like, how do I take that part of me when I was a child who loved dance? How can I incorporate that into a different way as an adult, right? And so then you really have to reflect, like, what is my individual thing? And you can look back at childhood, like what brought you so much happiness, but how can I like shift that into my adult world, right? And I just love the whole concept because it's like, you can really individualize this to yourself.
I love
have
that.
fun with it.
I love it too as like almost like an assessment tool, like because there's gonna be parts where you're like, okay, I'm really good at peace, but I really suck at rest, or you know, or like play, I haven't played anything, I don't feel like I'm very playful, like maybe that's something you need to work on. So it seems like for like an assessment tool, just to like figure out
that's a good point.
What are your strengths and what are your weaknesses, and how can you get them all kind of on track there? So I love that, because it's also too like that, like the way you describe the big 5 too, it's easy to conceptualize. It's not like this big thing. Like, okay, you need to do an hour of this today, an hour of this today. It's like
you have to eat this many macros a day.
It's just very forgiving, and like you said, individualized, which is so important. And just the aspect of play, like I'm with you. I don't do pediatrics, but I love the idea of play, because when you transition to like adult play can be like, you know, I've never gone skiing, let me try skiing, like something that's new, like let me challenge myself. And the only way to like grow is to like play and be explorative and curious. And
Yes.
that's what like adult play is. And it shouldn't end when you become an adult. But I think for many
Right.
people, we
And for
think,
some
well,
reason, they like, you know, the concept like adulting.
yes.
I
Yeah.
hate that word. Like
I
I
do too.
literally, it's like,
Yeah.
I feel
Cringeworthy.
cringe every time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, why? Like, even if you want the things that are per se an adult, like say you want a home, you want a family, you want kids, like you can have all those things
Yes.
and also be playful and like jokey. And also like I talked about this with someone, like you can pay your bills, like adulting, whatever, pay your bills,
Yeah.
but you can also like go have fun with it too. Like
Exactly.
I feel like people categorize those things and they like, you
Yeah.
don't have to, you
No,
know?
they're not mutually
Yeah.
exclusive. You can act
No.
silly, like you act silly and still be an adult that's functioning and providing for yourself. Like it's not like you have to
Exactly.
let
But
one
also have fun
go.
in the world.
Yeah, exactly. And
Yeah.
then the days go by much better when you can at least like look back and be like, oh wow, I did something fun today. It could be anything.
Yeah.
Show up for something fun each day.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I love that.
Yeah. Well, I love like the big five. I that's the first time I've been exposed to that. So I love that you presented that.
You,
And I'll have to look him
you
up.
should really look into Dr.
Yeah.
Matei. I think he has a book too. It's called The Myth of Normal. And I started reading it too. But
Yeah.
every time he talks, I'm like, this man is genius.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I'll definitely
Yeah.
have to look into his books and stuff because that's
Yeah.
I love just like conceptualizing it like that because it seems just so approachable in that way.
Yes. And I'm very big on that too, because like even with the binge eating thing, like if you like get so like, how do I describe this? Like you get so into it, like you need easy ways to get out. Like you need to make it ridiculously easy to actually get out of that, you know?
Exactly.
And, you know, life can get complicated. So if you can find systems and practices that like just make things easy, like life is smoother that way.
Exactly. Like if you make it a second job, you're going to resist it before you even start it. So you have to make it something that you're willing to and enjoy doing, like whatever it is, figure out what works for you. So I love that. So for anyone who wanted to connect with you, learn more about your programs, where can they find you?
Yes. So you can find me at Move the Feels. So Move the Feels at Instagram or TikTok. And then I also have a podcast as well. Same thing, Move the Feels. And you can find that on Spotify or Apple. And I just kind of go into all these things. And like I said before too, I feel like everyone's always learning. So right now the podcast is like, come learn with me. So if anyone wants to take a listen, please join.
Yeah, I love that. And I'll put everything in the show notes for everyone to connect with you. So that makes it easier. So thank you so much. This has been such an enjoyable conversation. And
I know. I loved it.
Yeah, it's so awesome. And I feel like it's just like so pertinent to what's going on today. Like people just need to figure out how to emotionally regulate and it applies to everyone, no matter how good you feel. Like there's moments where you're going to need this, you know? So I think there's just so much value in that and being able to figure out how you can help yourself. And I just think there's a lot of that. So,
and I want to say thank you. Thank you for bringing me on. And like, I love your work too, because I just feel like I told you kind of before, but like the binge eating thing, it's not something I normally talk about because it's just, again, there's so much in society. It's like, you don't talk about it. But I'm like, if you just talked about this stuff and made it like, feel like okay to talk about, like you would feel more normal in your feelings and then you can move through it, you know? So your podcast has been very healing for me to hear other people like have gone through this too. So
that means so much to me. Yeah. And I completely agree. It's like bringing light to that and exposing that. And it really just is a healing thing in itself that you're never alone. No one has a perfect life. Everyone has some struggle. And
just talk about it.
That's it. And yeah, exactly. Like none of us are perfect. There's good days, there's bad days. Like everyone has something they're going through or have gone through. So
yes, exactly.
It's so important to bring that to the surface and not feel like we have to hide all these things. It's draining to hide these things. So bring it to the surface. And it just allows you to be real. So thank you so much. And thank you so much for joining me on my podcast. And for anyone listening, if you haven't done so already, please subscribe and like it and share any comments or reviews that you have. I'd love to hear the feedback. And if you have any questions for myself or Priyanka, we would be more than happy to answer those. So thank you again so much for joining me on this.
Thank you.